Hi, first grade teachers. My name is Leanne Fisher, and I'm going to walk you through the scope and sequence. So here we go, scope and sequence time. Our units are going to be color-coded, and hopefully you saw your year at a glance to be able to identify that the 6 units have their own color. That's just to help you. Unit 1 is going to be the blue. We have our Unit 1 identified here, and we have our foundations block part of the scope and sequence, our pacing, and then our standards and skills that we'll be teaching during that Unit 1, and the instructional materials that we'll be using. And for our foundations block, we are using our 95 Phonics Core program. You have your lessons that are identified in your Phonics Core program. So for example, we have Lesson 1. The skill that we'll be teaching is going to be looking at kindergarten review with letters and sounds and blending. And then we also have our high frequency words mapped. So kindergarten review, and then we have of and his, being mindful that the words that are in red are taught or mapped as those heart words because those are the words that we know from heart or by heart. And then you also have identified other skills that will be taught as well. On the next page, and just also to remind you, it is linked here for you in first grade where it's underlined. That is so that you can have the full set of the 6 units for your scope and sequence. On the next page, you have here, let me get to that little slide for you here. You have your Unit 1. Now we're going to a little bit of a darker blue to represent that we're teaching our language, reading, and writing standards. You have your pacing guide, your standards and your skills that are being taught. So we have our standard is our reading literature, reading informational standards, RL and RI is how they're identified. And then you have your skill. You have your character setting and events, rhyme, and so on. You have your language standard and the skills within that, sentence, word order. And then you have your speaking and listening SL standard with the skills underneath it, which is retell and a text to enhance comprehension and so on. So being mindful that we have our standard and then you have the skill within that standard. You also have an end of unit competency. An end of unit competencies, by the end of the unit, students will be able to blank. And that'll be represented for each unit. What do we want students to be able to do? Well, this one is saying that we want them to be able to narrate in which they can recount 2 or more appropriately sequenced events, include some details regarding what happened, use temporal words to signal event order, and provide some sense of closure. This is not telling you how they will show you that they know these things, but this is what they will need to be able to do to show that end of unit competency. We've also identified on here some of the language functions and features that students' language they might be using to show you that competency of that skill, or that they're competent in that skill of that narrate in which they can recount 2 or more appropriately sequenced events. So we're not saying how, we're just showing you that this is what they need to be able to do by the end of the unit. Some of those functions and features that might be that they're nouns to group to add description and precision. It might be looking at prepositional phrases. It might be looking at compound sentences. But these are some ways that that language is being given to them because they're hearing that when you're teaching it. We also have this key language use, which is coming from our WIDA standards, and those key language uses here is going to be that narrate. You will see that alignment here sometimes with that key language use and that end of unit competency because we're talking about language. And what do our students need to have to show that competency is that access to that language, and how they produce that language is going to be determined of how you want to assess that end of unit competency. This is just touching on the very surface of this end of unit competency key language uses. There will be a lot of more information coming on that to better understand so that we can really give our students the best. You also have on your scope and sequence where you're looking at your text set. You have your week 1 text set. So for example here for my week 1, I have my essential question. What do you do at your school? And then you have your oral vocabulary. Your also have your essential components of those text sets that we've been talking about for that year 1 implementation. So you have your literature big book, your interactive read aloud, your shared read, anchor text, your paired reading, and then you also have that essential piece of that writing and what you're going to be focusing on for that week because we definitely want the students to have access to that writing piece, that application. One other thing I want to show you, I'm going to go back here at the bottom. I'm sorry, it's probably pretty low on your screen, but there is a special education connection, WonderWorks. Special education teachers are using a tool called WonderWorks, which is aligned with Wonders for Gen Ed, for general education. This identification here on the map isn't for you to teach, it's to show you what your special education teachers are teaching for students who are receiving services in special ed. And then there's that connection of the text that they're reading with the resource teacher that they could be getting in core instruction. So we want to show that alignment for you as the teacher to see when my students leave, what text will they be getting? Because we want to remember that they're not their students or my students, they're our students, and that we want to make sure that we're giving nothing but to the best of the students, and that's going to be that communication piece, but it's also here giving them that access to that good instruction and good materials. On your scope and sequence, one of the last pages that you have identified for your Unit 1, again, remember it's hyperlinked here for you at the top, so you can click to be able to follow along or look at it whenever you need to. You have your scaffolding in action, and you also have this titled right here, and then you have interdisciplinary connections. Let's talk about scaffolding in action. I have skill building and I have extensions. So if I have a student who I need to scaffold some of the material for them to give them access to the content, we have listed everything in Unit 1, but not an exhaustive list. There's probably plenty more, but some ideas of what you could do to be able to support your students who need that skill building piece, that scaffolding piece. We also have identified on here an extension because some students are not looking for the intervention piece, but they're looking for how can we go deeper with that content. So we've also identified in your Unit 1, in your Wonders, where can I go and what page can I go to be able to support my students. That's been identified for you as well. The last piece is that interdisciplinary connection. We have our science and social studies and art integration, which is going to be coming soon, but you have a science and a social studies piece. In your Wonders Unit 1, where can I go if I want to look at a connection to science and my science standards? Where do I want to go if I want to have a connection to social studies and my social studies standard? If it's represented in Wonders, we've represented it here on your scope and sequence so you don't have to wonder where it is. It's right here for you because we know that all content is important, and especially in first grade when they're not getting the specific science standards in material like they are in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So how do we give students access to those science standards? This is one way to support that piece. All right, so now in your Learning Task Notebook, you're going to look at your Unit 2, and that is colored like a goldenrod yellowish color for you to identify for your Unit 2. And your task is you're going to identify the end of unit competency for Unit 2. That was on the first page of that scope and sequence. At the very top where we had our pacing, our skills, and our standards, and then the end of unit competency. Identify what that is for Unit 2. And then what are your 3 anchor texts for your Unit 2? So going back to your Unit 2, identifying that you have your text set 1, text set 2, text set 3. Let's identify what are those 3 anchor texts that are going to be in there for each of those weeks for your students. And then also looking at your what text aligns with your SPED WonderWorks for Unit 2. So if I have a student who's receiving special education services, I could look at that gray section at the end of text set 3 to show me what text set they're going to be reading that aligns to what I did in core instruction. And then also the final thing is to name one extension for Unit 2, and that's going to be going to the very last page of your scope and sequence where we had the scaffolding in action, skill building, or extension. Name that one extension, just one for Unit 2. All right, have a great day. Thank you for watching.